First story: The Forgotten Lectures of Blackwood University. I was never one to believe in ghosts. Superstition was for the weak-minded, I always thought. But that night at Blackwood University changed everything. It was supposed to be a harmless dare, just a stupid adventure to kill time. Now, I wish we had never stepped foot inside that cursed place. Blackwood University had stood abandoned for years. A fire had gutted the main building over 2 decades ago, claiming the lives of Professor Henry Caldwell and a student named Mark Sullivan. Rumors swirled among the locals that their spirits never left, forever trapped in an endless cycle of their final lesson. But we were college students, drunk on bravado and the thrill of the unknown. We wanted to see for ourselves if the stories were true. There were 4 of us: me, Jason, Ryan, and Emily. We sneaked in through a broken side window, our flashlights casting long, jagged shadows against the soot-stained walls. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wood and decay. "This place is a death trap," Emily whispered, gripping my arm. Jason scoffed. "Scared already? We just got here." We wandered through the darkened corridors, our footsteps echoing against the silence. Desks lay overturned, books scattered across the floor, their pages brittle with age. Blackened chalkboards still bore the faint remnants of long-forgotten lessons. It was eerie, but nothing outright terrifying, until we heard it. A voice. Soft at first, then clearer, cutting through the thick stillness like a blade. And that concludes today's lecture class. Be sure to review the material before our next session. We froze. The voice was deep, authoritative, unmistakably that of a professor. But it was impossible. There was no one here. Ryan swallowed hard. "Tell me you guys heard that." We followed the sound, stepping cautiously toward room 204, the very lecture hall where Professor Caldwell had perished. The door was ajar, the inside bathed in an eerie, flickering glow. And then we saw them. At the front of the class stood Professor Caldwell, his form translucent, his face twisted in an unnatural grimace. Seated before him was the ghostly figure of Mark Sullivan, nodding attentively as though he were still among the living. The scene played out like a spectral performance frozen in time. Emily whimpered, "We need to go. Now." But Jason, the idiot, pulled out his phone. "No one's going to believe this. I need proof." The moment he hit record, both ghosts turned toward us. The professor's face contorted, his hollow eyes burning with a malevolent glow. Mark's head snapped unnaturally to the side, his mouth stretching into a gaping maw of blackness. "You should not be here." The room erupted into chaos. Desks toppled over, books flew through the air, and an unnatural wind howled through the ruined lecture hall. The professor lunged first, his spectral hands reaching for Jason. Jason screamed as his body convulsed, his skin paling as though something was being drained from him. He dropped to the floor, lifeless. Panic seized us. Emily yanked me back as Mark's ghost leaped forward, his cold, dead hands inches from my throat. We bolted, careening through the hallways as the building groaned and trembled. Shadows slithered along the walls, whispering our names, urging us to stay. We didn't stop running until we reached the exit, bursting out into the night, gasping for air. But Jason was gone. We called his name, but there was nothing, only the oppressive silence of Blackwood University. The police found no trace of him, as if he had never existed. The next day, I checked Jason's phone. The video had saved. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The footage was grainy, the lighting poor. But there, clear as day, was Professor Caldwell, standing at his podium, his hollow eyes locked onto the camera. And behind him, among the seated ghosts, was Jason. He turned slowly, his lifeless eyes meeting mine through the screen. The video cut to black. Second story: The Shadows of Hallowbrook. I had no real reason to choose Hallowbrook University. Maybe it was the allure of a fresh start, or perhaps the desire to escape the small-town monotony of Liberty, New York. Either way, from the moment I set foot on that secluded campus, something didn't feel right. No one warned me about the place's twisted past, the darkness that clung to it like a shadow. But even if they had, would I have listened? The first night in my dorm was one I'll never forget. The building was old, the kind with long, creaky hallways and windows that barely let in any light after sunset. I had just finished unpacking when I heard it. The whisper. Faint at first, like someone was speaking just outside my door. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the wind or my overactive imagination. But then it came again, and again, night after night. At first, it was easy to ignore. Odd sounds, a whisper here, a faint thump there, like footsteps echoing down the hall. I thought I was just tired, or maybe the building was settling. My roommate, Jake, had been there for a semester already and didn't think twice about it. Old buildings do weird things, he'd said. I wanted to believe him. But then the shadows started. At first, they were just glimpses in the corner of my eye, nothing solid. They'd dart out of view too quickly for me to make sense of. But every time I turned my head, I was certain something was there, something waiting, watching. The sensation grew stronger with each passing day. The dreams came next. Vivid, unsettling nightmares where I would wander through the darkened campus at night. But it wasn't the campus I recognized. The trees were gnarled, their branches twisted like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The buildings were looming, their windows empty, staring. And always, there was a figure, tall, thin, faceless, following me. No matter how fast I ran, it was always there, getting closer with each step. I tried to shake it off. After all, it was just stress, right? New place, new people. Maybe I was just adjusting. But then, I decided to talk to someone about it. I visited Dr. Williams, a history professor known for her expertise on the university's origins. Her office smelled of old books, the air thick with dust. She was quiet, measured, her eyes dark beneath the weight of what she knew. Hallowbrook wasn't always a school, she said, her voice low and serious. Before it was a university, it was an asylum. They called it a sanatorium back then, but it was an asylum all the same. The things they did to the patients, the experiments. She trailed off, her face pale. Some of them never left, and some of them still linger. I should have run. I should have left. But I didn't. One night, the whispers reached a new level of intensity. They were no longer just sounds in the hall, but voices, clear, distinct, murmuring from all directions. Panic crept in. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. And the shadows? They were no longer in the corners of my vision. They were in the room with me, standing just out of sight, their presence suffocating. Jake was gone for the weekend, and I found myself alone in the dorm. That's when I made a decision. I would confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with only a flashlight, I ventured out into the heart of the campus. It was late, the moon high in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked stone pathways. I walked toward the abandoned building at the far end of the campus, the one that everyone avoided. No one ever talked about it, but I knew. I had to go there. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was cold, the scent of mildew heavy in the air. The flashlight flickered, but I pressed on. As I moved deeper into the building, I felt a presence, something old, something angry, watching me, drawing nearer. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing in the doorway at the far end of the hall. Its face was featureless, a blur of shadows. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure moved, its limbs jerking unnaturally, its form stretching and shifting with each step. It wasn't walking, it was gliding, floating toward me. And then, I heard it, loud, clear in my mind. You shouldn't have come. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound deafening. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure closed in, its hands reaching for me. I screamed, but no sound came out. My breath was shallow, my body trembling as I stumbled backward into the darkness. I couldn't escape. The walls seemed to close in, their edges darkening, the air thickening with the weight of 1,000 eyes watching. The shadows pressed against me, suffocating me, pulling me into the abyss. When they found me the next day, I wasn't the same. My body was still warm, but my eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring into nothing. The whispers never stopped. They followed me, echoing in my ears, inside my mind, a constant reminder that once you enter the shadows of Hallowbrook, you never leave. Third story, the eyes in the walls. The semester had barely begun when I arrived in Clearwater, Kansas. I was excited, eager to dive into my studies at the local university, but there was something off about the town. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the eerie silence that hung over everything, or the way the locals stared just a little too long, their eyes wide and unblinking. They were the kind of people who didn't seem to sleep, just wandered through the streets, eyes fixed, as if waiting for something. I had rented a small room in an old, rundown house on the outskirts of town. The rent was cheap, and I figured it was perfect for someone like me, a broke college student just trying to survive. But from the very first night, things didn't feel right. I remember sitting at my desk trying to finish an assignment for one of my classes when I heard a sound. It was soft at first, like scratching or maybe a light tapping, coming from the wall behind me. I turned around, but the room was empty. The old house creaked and groaned, settling into the cold of the night, or so I thought. The next day, I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe just the old plumbing in the house. But the sound persisted, night after night, louder each time, scratching, tapping. Sometimes it sounded like whispering voices, as though they were calling my name. I couldn't sleep. I didn't tell anyone, because who would believe me? Then it happened. One night, the noise was so intense it shook the walls. I got up to investigate, heart pounding in my chest. I followed the sound to the closet in my room. It was a small, dusty space with a cracked door that creaked when I touched it. I pulled it open, half expecting to find a pipe or something simple, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Behind the wall, there was a small hole, no bigger than a fist. The hole was surrounded by scratches, like something or someone had been desperately trying to break through. I peered into the darkness beyond, my breath shallow, when I felt something grab my wrist. It was cold, so cold, and the grip was unnaturally tight. I tried to pull away, but the cold fingers tightened. A voice whispered from the darkness, "Help us." I screamed, but the voice only grew louder, the air thickening with a suffocating dread. I wrenched my arm free and stumbled backward, falling onto the floor. My heart raced as the room seemed to grow colder, darker. The walls, they were breathing. Panicking, I ran out of the room and bolted the door behind me. But it didn't matter. I could still hear it, the whispering, the scratching. It was coming from all around me. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was as if the house itself was alive, hungry, and aware of me. I ran out into the night, never looking back, not even once. As I reached the street, I saw the townspeople. They were all standing in front of the house, staring at it. Their eyes, those eyes had an emptiness to them now, hollow and distant. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the house, waiting. I never went back to Clearwater. I moved to another town, far away, and started over. But I know now, whatever was in that house, it didn't want me to leave. And it never let me go. I still hear the scratching sometimes, late at night when I'm alone. And every time I close my eyes, I see those eyes, staring, waiting, from the shadows. They're still watching, and they're still waiting.